Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei meets with the Kendo girls? Part 1. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei Haidu, a middle school student that recently begun his third year, had just gotten his acceptance notice from Kuoh Academy in the mail. Rumors of this particular school going co-ed had spread throughout the region like wildfire. The school director had been interviewed as to what the new direction for the school would be. The director had told the reporter that, "We will make Kuoh Academy into a school that people around the world will seek out. We will strive to educate and train our students to become the very best in their respective fields of study. So for the coming school year, we will have a test group of 50 eligible male students attend." Issei and his two best friends, Matsuda and Motohama, immediately applied. Fantasies filled their heads about being surrounded by beautiful girls that would fawn over them and grant their carnal desires. The entry requirements had never been made public, they only said that a physical exam would take place, as well as a written exam. That fact had made both of Issei's friends' faces pale. Matsuda was a former athlete in their second year, but joined the photography club and openly announced being a lolicon, but his grades were horrible. Motohama was the exact opposite, his grades were well above average, but his physical capabilities were as weak as Matsuda's grades. So if either of them wanted to get into their personal paradise they would need to make immediate improvements. Issei was almost on par with Matsuda in physical strength and his grades weren't that far behind Motohama, so his chance to get into the school seemed to be the highest out of the three. The trio had discussed what would happen if any one of them failed to meet requirements and be denied entry. "If I don't make it, one of you guys has to put a loli in your harem," Matsuda exclaimed to his two friends. "You have to find the girl with the best three sizes and conquer her heart," Motohama said. He had developed an ability that would allow him to accurately gauge the size of any girl just from looking at them. He was also the biggest Erich fan of the three. Issei on the other hand, wanted something a bit more wholesome, should his entry be looked over. "If I can't get in, it'll be your duty to protect the girls from rapey douchebags." For the better part of a decade, Issei had become quite the pervert, but one thing had always remained a core part of who he was. If someone needed help, Issei would put his all into helping them and never asking for a reward. And Issei made sure to never lie to anyone, he always wore his heart on his sleeve. Aside from his dreams of having a harem, Issei had always liked the idea of being the knight in shining armor, saving the damsel in distress and winning her over. But Issei's school years thus far have made it abundantly clear that the girls saw him as a pervert, and no matter how nice he was to any of the girls at his school, they never took the time to really get to know him. Issei was jumping for joy, he was one of the lucky 50 guys to be allowed into Kuoh Academy, he had to see if his friends had gotten their letters yet. Issei took out his cell phone and sent a group message to his buddies. "Yo, you guys get your acceptance letters from Kuoh? 'Cause guess what bitches I got in." The message read. Issei was eagerly waiting for a response from either of them, and after an hour or so had gone by while he was watching TV, finally his phone gave him the news. Matsuda's read "No go bro, rejected like a saggy stripper equals." Issei was sad that the trio would be broken up, but there was still hope for Motohama, right? Just as Issei was about to put his phone down, Motohama's message came through. Motohama's read "Today is a sad day, for I too was rejected." And just like that the trio had informed that they would be broken up for the better part of 3 years. The thought of going to a school where he wouldn't have any friends by his side had sunken in over the course of a week and it was starting to be intimidating. So Issei thought a walk through town to clear his head would calm his nerves a bit. Kuoh Town, shopping district 8:30 p.m. Issei had been walking around for the greater part of 3 hours now and the sun had set. Issei was walking through part of town that had small shops and restaurants lining the streets. He had stayed in the park in his neighborhood for over an hour, just sitting on the bench across from a water fountain. He sat there watching the kids play and the parents sit nearby watching their children with a smile on their faces. Will I ever have that? Issei thought. So far that wasn't looking like a likely outcome, granted there was still plenty of time since he hadn't even started high school yet. Issei had long forgotten the reason he was walking around town by the time he left the park to continue his journey through town. Issei was taking notice of how empty the streets had become, it was strange, he could have sworn that people were usually walking around still at this time. Whatever, it was probably just his imagination. Passing by a cafe, Issei stopped at the window of a manga shop. He was just mindlessly looking through the glass, staring at a few of the new additions that had arrived within the past week, but not really taking notice of them at the same time. I wonder, will we still hang out like we do now, or will we drift apart since we'll be at different schools? If that happened, Issei would be down to 0 friends, just like he was before he met them when his only other friend at the time had moved out of the country. Well, whatever. I should probably go home now. First day of break before Kuoh. The past few months had been stressful for the young boy. Since Matsuda and Motohama had failed to get into Kuoh, they had to scramble to get accepted into a different school, and so they spent most of their time at a nearby cram school. Luckily they had been accepted into the same school not too far away from Kuoh. Issei had been looking for something to do to relieve his boredom, as well as the growing anxiety from this whole new school, and no friends deal. His teacher suggested working out and said that it could be therapeutic on a weary mind. So Issei took the advice to heart and started with running for the first few weeks, before finding that he actually enjoyed it, so he decided that he would add in some weight training as well. Issei had seen some improvements in his strength and endurance, as well as learned a few things about himself. He noticed after his first week that he didn't get as sore as other people would claim he should. His appearance hadn't really changed, the only difference was that the small muscles he did have were slightly more defined on his relatively scrawny 15-year-old body. Issei had decided that his morning run would be to Kuoh Academy, so he could get a feel of the campus. A picture popped into his head about girls and changing in the locker room as he accidentally stumbles in and being piled on by said girls. A grin spread across his face as he jogged towards the school that he would soon study at. Kuoh Academy. Issei stopped at the gates of the school to catch his breath and wipe the sweat off of his forehead. Issei took in the side of the school, a tall 3-story brick building with a classic architecture style. He could see a few girls walking on the campus in uniforms that seemed to be for the kendo club, judging by the shinai in each of the girls' hands. Walking past the gates and towards the main building, Issei didn't notice the girls in the kendo uniforms that were trying to interrogate him as to why a boy was on their campus due to the headphones in his ears and music he had playing. Issei walked up to what looked like some sort of training hall and was about to enter to see what was inside when something lightly struck his left shoulder. Issei flinched at the sudden hit and quickly turned while taking a step to his right to get away from whatever struck him, only to see a group of 7 girls in the kendo uniform glaring at him suspiciously. This doesn't look good. Issei thought. One of the girls pointed to her ear, trying to communicate to Issei for him to take out the headphones. Issei didn't understand the gesture and stood there with his head tilted to the side for a few seconds as he took in the appearances of the girls that had stopped him. It took all of his willpower to not pass out from excitement. All of the girls in front of him were gorgeous. 5 of them seemed older, while the 2 that were directly in front of him looked about his age, so probably incoming students just like him. One of the younger girls had pink shoulder-length hair held back with a white band, brown eyes with a hint of red in them. She had to be a cup already with a thin waist. She reminded Issei of Motohama's favorite porn star, Momo Sona. The other girl had longer brown hair that reached mid-back in a ponytail with a red ribbon, bangs just above her eyes, the sides of which were longer and reached breast level. She had light brown eyes, just like Issei. Her chest was a little bit bigger than her pink-hair companions, but her body was just as stellar. While Issei was mentally undressing each of the girls, the pink-haired one reached and yanked the headphones from his ears with a glare on her face, clearly annoyed that he wasn't responding to them. Issei flinched a little from the force of his earbuds being ripped out and rubbed his right ear briefly, then looked at the angry group of girls. "You, what are you doing here? This is an all-girls school," the pink-haired girl said while still glaring at Issei. Issei looked at the group. The 5 older girls had taken a step back to see how their new club members would handle the situation and step in if needed. The brown-haired girl was holding her shinai at the ready in case the boy in front of her tried anything on them. Issei was a little confused by the all-girls school comment. Had they not heard about Kuoh going co-ed? I was just out for a run and wanted to check the place out since I'll be starting here next semester," Issei stuttered out, hoping not to meet the wrong end of the wooden sword anytime soon. But he just couldn't help himself. His eyes kept wavering from their eyes to their chests, and it didn't go unnoticed by the girls in front of him. The brown-haired girl was the one who spoke up this time, while covering her chest with her hand that didn't have the shinai and slightly turning the front of her body away from Issei's gaze. "So you're one of the 50 perverts being let into the school." After saying her piece, she scowled at the boy and awaited his answer. "Just fucking great, haven't even been to the first day of school and I'm already ousted," Issei thought. And without his friends here, there was no escaping the wrath of these girls. Issei needed to find a way to placate the female sword wielders in front of him so they don't try and beat him into submission. But he turned into a stuttering mess and found himself unable to really say anything before being cut off by the pink-haired girl. She gave him a lecture that silenced him immediately, bringing back a memory of something his mother told him when he got his acceptance letter. And caused Issei to ponder. I really just wanted to see." "Shut it, perv. We know why you're here. You probably had some stupid fantasy about taking advantage of the girls at this school. You didn't even last 10 seconds before eyeing us up. Guys like you are a plague. If you don't get yourself together, you'll just end up dying alone and the world would be a better place without perverts like you in it." Issei was speechless. There wasn't anything he could think of to counter her harsh words, and Issei doubted she'd listen anyway. She had already labeled him as a pervert, just like the girls from his old school. And just like them, she wouldn't bother to give him the time of day or even learn his name. His face was downcast at that realization. Issei was starting in a school where he didn't know anyone, labeled as a pervert before the break was even over, and with the student body being overwhelmingly female. There was a good chance that Issei might not make any friends during his years here if he didn't make a change. Issei's mother had pretty said those exact words to him before. Issei, if you don't learn to control yourself, you'll end up alone. Girls won't want to get to know you if they think you're only after their bodies. Issei's parents had been happy that he got into such an elite school, but they knew why he attempted it in the first place. His first year in middle school, Issei had really devolved into a pervert and pretty much nothing else. His parents had become increasingly disappointed in his behavior and did little to hide it. Sure, they still loved him, but his nature would always get him into trouble and gave him a bad name. And his parents by extension. The Kendo girls had apparently had enough and had turned to walk away before the voice of the boy they were belittling spoke up. His voice was barely loud enough for the two younger girls to hear. "You're right," Issei said quietly. The pink-haired girl and her brunette friend had been the only ones to hear him. The older girls kept walking, having not heard him, nor did they really care in the first place. His admission was surprising to them. The guys they had come across that acted in similar ways never admitted that the way they acted wasn't appropriate. They turned to face the boy, only to see him putting his headphones back in and walking towards the gate of the campus. Home that evening, Issei finished his run after his confrontation with the Kendo girls. For the rest of his run, Issei had been lost in thought about how his new school life will go. I wonder if they'd help me. It'd be nice to start school with at least one friend. Issei had been thinking about how he could rein in his perverted nature. His dad was pretty much out of the question to seek for advice. He knew his mother would be willing, but would her advice be useful for a high school student? Well, no harm in trying, I guess. After dinner, Issei had asked his mother if she could give him advice on how to control himself. She had been shocked at first, but was quickly replaced by happiness that her son might have a chance at a normal high school experience after all. They sat down with some drinks and talked for 2 hours about how to talk to and behave with a girl. She said that Issei should go back and talk to the Kendo girls again and ask for their help as well, since he'd be tempted around beautiful girls. Their help may be more beneficial and quicker to take hold, especially with those shinai. After the talk with his mom, Issei was laying in bed thinking about what she said and if the girls would even be willing. But it did sound like a good plan, and hopefully by the time school started, he'd befriend at least one of them and be able to get through school without the perv label plastered across his face. Kuoh Academy gates the next day. Issei once again took his morning run to Kuoh Academy, hoping to ask for the girls' help. Once he passed through the gates, he took out his headphones so they couldn't sneak up on him like the day before. Walking to the direction he saw them yesterday, he heard the sound of wood hitting wood and some grunts of exertion. Issei stood at the entrance of the building the noises were coming from. He was contemplating whether he should wait outside for them to take a break or go inside. Issei was a bit nervous since they probably would think he was just there to stare at them and that would probably lead to beat down. But Issei was brought out of his thoughts by a familiar feeling, something hard firmly pressed into his shoulder blade. And a familiar stern voice rang out from behind him. "What are you doing back here, perv?" It was the brunette that spoke to Issei. Issei took a deep breath. He was hoping that this would work. Letting the breath out, Issei turned around with his hands up. Just as he thought, it was the same two girls from yesterday. He'd addressed them, but he hadn't caught their names yesterday. "Good morning, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just wanted to talk to you two." The pink-haired girl didn't let him finish. She apparently didn't want to waste any time talking to him. "Talk to us about what?" she said. She crossed her arms under her chest. Issei noticed how it pushed her breasts up. It took all his willpower not to glance. The brunette lowered her wooden sword, but kept it at the ready in her right hand. Issei gulped. It was now or never. He took another deep breath, letting it out. He bowed his head to the two girls. To say they were surprised was an understatement, and it showed on their faces. Their expressions turned to confusion once Issei spoke. "Please help me," he said with his head still lowered. He would hold this position as long as he needed to get them to understand he was serious. When the girls didn't answer after a few seconds, Issei continued, elaborating on what he was asking of them. "I don't want people to only see me as a pervert. I want people to feel comfortable and safe around me. I want to control my perverted urges. I'll do anything you ask, please help me." The girls looked at each other, seemingly having a silent conversation between them. The girl with the shinai placed it under his chin and lifted, causing Issei to stand back up straight to look at them. Issei didn't know how they were going to answer, but he hadn't been hit by the sword yet, so that seemed like a good start. "What's your name?" the pink-haired girl asked. She uncrossed her arms and had them at her hips. Her face was unreadable, which was a little unnerving. "Issei Haidu?" Issei said, not looking to change their seemingly calm but cautious demeanor. The pink-haired girl nodded and gestured to herself and the brunette next to her. I'm Yui Katase. This is Kaori Murayama. So. Haidu, are you serious about this? Issei looked at the girls he now knew as Katase and Murayama and nodded. I'm 100% serious. I know it probably won't be easy, but if you're willing to help me, I promise to give it everything I have. Issei said seriously. Katase and Murayama looked at each other, having another silent conversation. The way he left yesterday, saying that they were right about him, had confused them. They were expecting to all of the boys that enrolled in Kuoh to be unruly perverts with no hope for salvation. But standing in front of them was a boy who wanted to be given a chance to prove he was worth getting to know. The girls nodded to each other with a smile. Then Murayama spoke. Alright, if you're serious, then we're willing to help you. But if you slip up, I'll beat you into the ground. Understood? Murayama's tone started sincere but turned cold when she mentioned that she'd punish Issei for messing up. Issei's face showed how he felt about their answer. He had a radiant smile, extremely happy that they were willing to help. Issei nodded vigorously, then saluted to Murayama in a joking manner. Yes ma'am, understood. Issei stood at the gates of his school, mentally preparing himself to make a good first impression on his teacher and classmates. He had been throwing himself into his training, both physical and what Murayama and Katase referred to as his perversion training. The physical training had actually been enjoyable for him. It had become a way for Issei to clear his mind after the beatings and berating he got from the two girls when he messed up. Katase and Murayama had at first been pretty distant with Issei when they first started guiding him from his perverted ways. But after a month they started to feel like real friends. They don't refer to him by his last name anymore, instead using Ice his nickname from middle school. Issei himself didn't feel they'd like to be called by their first names, so he stuck to the last name and they hadn't brought it up. As the new semester grew closer, the true natures of his two new friends came out to reveal themselves. Katase was usually a composed and polite girl, unless dealing with someone hostile or otherwise inappropriate, like a guy trying to peep into their locker room, then she was assertive and aggressive. Murayama's was the real surprise though. Once she felt comfortable around Issei, she teased him whenever she thought he was glancing at her body and would then smack him on the head with her shinai. Outside of her tendency to tease him, Murayama was a very easygoing girl. Issei looked round the school grounds taking notice of the students. The girls mostly wore the standard uniform, which consisted of a white button-down shirt with black vertical stripes, a black shoulder cape with white accents, a magenta skirt with white accents, a black corset and brown dress shoes. Issei enjoyed the look of the girls in their uniform, as well as how short the skirt was. With a gust of wind, the skirt would shift just enough to catch a glimpse underneath. The male uniform was rather plain compared to the girls. They wore black dress pants, a white button-down shirt with the same black stripes, a black jacket with white accents and brown dress shoes. Issei wasn't a big fan of the standard way to wear the uniform. He instead chose to leave the jacket and button-down shirt open, with a red t-shirt underneath. Issei walked through the halls towards his classroom, Class 1C, on the first floor of the main building. He hadn't spotted anyone he knew yet, not even Katase and Murayama. He had noticed that some of the male students had already been beaten by some of the girls. Apparently the girls were very adamant about not letting any pervert slip through their fingers. Issei was very thankful for his reversion training as he saw the bruises his fellow male students had. Kuoh Academy Class 1C. Issei was told by his teacher to stand outside the class until he was called. Being singled out like that made him really nervous. He had only spent a few seconds in the classroom before his teacher asked him to wait in the hall, but he noticed that he was the only male in his class. That fact would have made him giddy beyond belief before his training and witnessing the girls' brutality. But now, it only added to his anxiety. He'd be the center of attention for the girls to try and deduce his true nature. Issei could hear the teacher speaking to her students. Okay girls, I'm sure you're aware of the new initiative Kuoh Academy has put in place. We now have a test group of male students to start to transition to a co-ed school. We are lucky enough to have one with us in our class. Come on in and introduce yourself. At the last part, Issei realized he was being called into the room and followed the directions of his teacher. Issei walked into the room and stood at the front, next to the teacher. Looking out to his classmates, Issei had one immediate thought: this is going to be harder than I thought. Issei scanned over the girls in his class, and most of them were beauties in their own right. Issei was going to be put to the test, and if he failed, he'd be shunned as a pervert once again. Issei wrote his name on the chalkboard. He took a long deep breath to calm himself before turning around. Alright, remember, good first impression, maintain eye contact, no roaming eyes. Issei thought. Taking lessons hard learned from his mother, Katase and Murayama. Issei looked back to his classmates, then introduced himself with a nervous smile. He was hoping that they hadn't caught on to how nervous he was feeling at being the center of attention for so many good-looking girls, even his teacher. Hello, my name is Issei Haidu. Issei mentally cursed himself for stuttering. That really didn't start out the way he wanted it to. So he cleared his throat to continue. A few of the girls giggled under their breath, but Issei still heard it. Good going Issei, they're already laughing at you idiot. I'm looking forward to get know each of you. Issei said his last part and bowed slightly to the class. His teacher had apparently picked up on his nervous demeanor as did the class and addressed the girls before assigning Issei to a seat. Okay girls, I'm sure Mr. Haidu here is a bit nervous at being so outnumbered, so be sure to be on your best behavior. The teacher said, much to Issei's dismay at being outed in front of the class. She then scanned the room to find a seat for her only male student. She spoke to Issei once he found one. Why don't you sit in between Ms. Hanakai and Ms. Kusaka? Momo, Reya, raise your hands please. 2 girls raised their hands, each having a smile on their face. Once Issei saw the 2 hands rise, his face turned bright red, which made the girls openly giggle this time. The 2 girls the teacher referred to were both otherworldly beauties. The first had brown hair tied into 2 braids that reached her waist, light brown eyes that held a gentle look in them. Her figure, from what Issei could see, was top-notch. Is it a requirement to have supermodel looks to enroll here or something? Issei thought. The other girl was just as much of a looker. She had snow-white hair that reached mid-back, straight bangs at eyebrow level. Her eyes were glacial blue that were absolutely captivating. It was honestly hard for Issei to look away. How the hell am I supposed to focus on class with those 2 next to me? Issei bowed to the teacher and walked to his seat, which was 2 rows from the back, in between Momo who had the window seat on his left and Reya on his right. Once he sat down, both girls smiled and leaned over to whisper to Issei before class started. Momo was the first to speak. Hey there, just call me Momo, it's nice to meet you Issei. Let us know if you need anything. Issei was still nervous from sitting next to these 2 girls, but wanted to make a good impression, so he opted for the friendly greeting. Thanks, my friends all call me Ice, it's to meet the both of you. The other girl next to Issei giggled, apparently he was easy to read and they could tell how nervous he was. And she spoke in a manner that Issei had been acquainted with from murayama. Nice to meet you Ice, call me Reya. You seem a little overwhelmed, do we make you nervous? Reya said in a slight teasing whisper. At which Issei nervously rubbed the back of his head, he was surprised she called him by his nickname so quickly, but he actually preferred it. I didn't expect there to be sitting between 2 body. Issei realized what he was about to blurt out and quickly clamped his mouth shut. That was close, hoping to correct himself before the girls caught on to what he was going to say. He spoke again. I didn't expect to be the only guy in the class, I thought there'd be at least one other. Issei's hopes were quickly shot down as both girls openly laughed, not trying to hide it this time. Issei's face was once again as red as his shirt, so he decided to just take out the materials for his class and pay attention to the lecture. As Issei was gathering his materials, he missed a shared look between Momo and Reya as they nodded to each other. They were each sharing similar thoughts. Kaichu needs to meet him. Kuoh Academy lunch break, student council room. A few minutes before the lunch bell rang, Momo and Reya had left, claiming they had student council work to attend to, and they were now in said room with 4 other people. The first-year duo were standing in front of a desk where Sona Shitori, the vice president of the student council, sat. Just next to Sona was her right hand and second in command, Tsubaki Shinra. On the sofa to the left of the room were the other 2 members, Tomo Meguri and Yuri Tsubasa. Momo and Reya had just informed their king about the boy in their class and the aura the boy emitted, which was that of a sacred gear holder. And both of you are certain of this? Sona questioned the 2 standing in front of her. They both nodded in response. Reya continued her explanation to the heiress about their peculiar classmate. Positive Kaichu, I could feel it the moment he stepped into the room, but when he sat next to us, it was almost dominating. He doesn't seem to be aware of it either. Reya looked over to Momo to see if she agreed with her own assessment, to which Momo nodded and brought up questions for how to proceed next. Kaichu, should we ask him to come here after class? Sona had her elbows on the desk, arms propped up and fingers interlaced, resting her chin on them. She thought through the possibilities of approaching the boy so quickly. She wanted to be absolutely certain before bringing him into her headquarters. No mistakes could be made here. She decided on a different approach instead. No, we don't want to draw attention to him or ourselves so soon into the semester. Do you know where he is now? At the question, both Momo and Reya tilted their heads in thought before one of other members in the room spoke up. A girl with blue shoulder-length hair, deep ocean blue eyes, and a tall slender frame that held an aura of calm confidence. I saw him walk out with 2 of the new girls from the kendo club towards the tree by the back of the gym. All occupants looked over towards the blue-haired girl, wondering just how she knew where the boy had gone, since his actual classmates hadn't seen it themselves. Sona was going through the information provided by her servants, as well as the folder containing information of the boy in question. Then her queen and second in command spoke up for the first time since the arrival of their teammates. Kaichu, is there any possibility of Lady Gremory already having claimed him for her own peerage? Normally that would be a concern, but Sona was certain that a rival wouldn't have any stake in her prospect yet. But there was a pact between them that forbade either from stealing potential members from each other, while only a verbal agreement, they respected each other enough to never break it. So if Rias had taken notice of him, Sona would have heard about it. And since Rias wasn't at school today, nor had she been informed of her scouting Issei, he was fair game. This would be the only situation where Sona would possibly thank Lord and Lady Gremory for that ridiculous arranged marriage agreement. And should the testimony of her bishops be true, then she had a deal to present to Rias, one that would greatly benefit all involved. But it all hinged on how the interaction with Issei went. No Tsubaki, there isn't. Let's go meet this boy, shall we? Kuoh Academy grounds. So Ice, how's your first day going so far? I don't need to beat on you like the other pervs, do I? Issei was sitting outside eating his boxed lunch with katase and murayama. Murayama was already done in questioning Issei. Issei had a mouthful of food, so he just shook his head. Once he swallowed his food he verbally responded. No need for that, thankfully. Things are good so far. It's a little overwhelming though. Issei responded. The two girls had noticed that Issei was an open book with how he felt pretty much all of the time. That was something that caused a good portion of the issues he's faced. It's okay not to say everything that's on your mind, that and lying are not the same thing. Both girls laughed at Issei saying he was overwhelmed, they both knew what he meant. Murayama calmed down and retorted in the teasing manner he had gotten accustomed to. You overwhelmed by all the beautiful girls around you? Instead of getting embarrassed, Issei just nodded and voiced his thoughts in his usual manner. Yay, I'm starting to seriously think that only beautiful girls were allowed into this school. Issei said without thinking. Both katase and Murayama had a slight tinge of pink of their cheeks at the implication. They both knew that Issei thought they were good looking, they had been able to work that out of him within the first week of them helping the boy. Issei brought them both out of their own thoughts, not realizing his words had any effect on them. So, how's your patrol of the male student body going so far? Katase held a mischievous smirk that Issei knew meant trouble as she spoke. We personally caught 8 this morning before school started. It's just like we thought, all these boys enrolled to try and screw around with the girls here. You should count yourself lucky, Ice, and hopefully you won't be the one meeting the end of a shinai. Issei wasn't given the chance to respond to Katase. 2 new people made themselves known when the shorter of the two spoke. So the rumors of girls banding together are true. The trio sitting underneath the tree turned their heads to see who it was that spoke out of the blue. Katase and Murayama's faces lost almost all color as they saw who it was that made their way into the conversation. 2 of the most well-known girls at Kuoh Academy. Issei turned to follow the line of sight of his 2 female friends. When he saw the 2 girls standing a few yards from where Katase and Murayama were, Issei was stunned silent. Issei unknowingly muttered his first thoughts. Beautiful. Issei's quiet words had escaped Katase and Murayama, so the threat of being beaten by their wooden swords was eliminated, however it didn't escape the supernatural hearing of the 2 new arrivals. Sona and Tsubaki both heard Issei, but kept their stoic expressions. Sona was a strict-looking girl, she had black hair and a chin-length bob cut. Her eyes were violet that hid behind thinly rimmed glasses of the same color. Her skin looked unblemished, smooth. Her bust was modest, but not by any means underwhelming. Her face was perfectly symmetrical and set into an even expression, not giving any emotions away. The taller girl by her side had the same expression on her face. Her hair was black and silky, reached down to the back of her knees, and had split bangs. Her eyes were heterochromic, one being a light brown and the other a deeper violet than Sona's. Murayama and Katase had broken from the shock, greeted and slightly bowed their heads to the 2 that made themselves known. Hello, Vice President Shitori, pleasure to meet you. Hello, Vice President, what can we do for you? Sona briefly glanced to the girls, before setting her gaze back onto Issei. Tsubaki's had never left him. The moment they were within 15 feet of Issei, they could feel for themselves what Momo and Reya had been talking about. It was as if your whole body was being conquered, being told that you were nothing more than dust in the wind compared to the might of whatever Issei possessed. Sona knew more than ever that she needed this boy. Hello, pleasure to meet you as well. I've made it a point to meet with each of our new male students. My name is Sona Shitori, Vice President of the Student Council. This is Tsubaki Shinra, a fellow member of the Student Council. You're Issei, correct? Issei was surprised and a little concerned that anyone on the Student Council knew his name. Issei glances over to Katase and Murayama to see if they had any idea why these 2 girls would know his name, but they were as surprised as he was. But their expressions quickly turned to suspicion. Thinking that Issei had done something wrong while they were apart. Instead of pleading his innocence, Issei made to greet the 2 Student Council members. Issei went to bow to them as his female companions had done, but was met with an outstretched hand from Sona. Issei took hold of it and shook as he introduced himself. I am Issei, it's a pleasure to meet you Vice President Shitori and Ms. Shinra. I haven't caused any problems to have you seek me out directly, have I? Even though they said that they were meeting with all of the male students, the fact that they met with Issei only halfway through the first school day was a little concerning. Once their hands made contact with each other, the previously unblemished and pristine skin of Sona's face started to turn an ash-gray color, along with a cold sweat quickly sprouting. Sona's legs immediately felt weak, unable to hold up the weight of her body from what it was that she sensed within the boy in front of her. This Shitori Sona Kaichu. Issei and Tsubaki both called out from the sudden weakness in her legs and started to fall forward. Losing her balance, Sona fell forward and tried to brace herself for impact onto the ground. Where she was expecting to find herself on the ground, she was instead met with the firm and gentle grip of Issei Haidu. She was surprised when she looked up to Issei's face and saw his expression. When Sona had gone through the info on Issei's past, there were many accounts of how his perverted tendencies had gotten him into trouble with two other students that he was friends with. But she saw at the moment was nothing like that. All she saw was a boy that was genuinely and honestly concerned for her well-being. That was not the person she expected to meet today. Momo and Reya had said that Issei had been a nervous wreck during his introduction that morning. Seemingly trying to hide his overly honest and perverted nature from the rest of the girls in school. He saw a problem and looked to find a way to resolve it. I want this boy even more now. Those were the last thoughts before Sona was bombarded with the same energy she felt before while shaking Issei's hand, only this time it was 10x stronger from the added level of skin contact. And with that contact came an image that had Sona both awe-stricken and terrified. The red dragon, with eyes and emerald color so vibrant and powerful that half of the lower-class devil population would probably pass out just from a glance. With the close proximity to this aura, Sona passed out in Issei's arms. Kuoh Academy Infirmary. Sona woke up in the infirmary of her school. Her violet eye fluttered open and took note of her surroundings. Seeing the medical type of environment and the sun still shining through the window, she knew exactly where she was and that it hadn't been too long since her conversation with Issei Haidu, such an intriguing person. Sona was absolutely certain of what she saw, a dragon of legend, one that helped cause devastation so great that the devils alone wouldn't have been able to bring it down by themselves. Sona Kaichu? How are you feeling? Tsubaki's concerned yet relieved voice could be heard from next to Sona's bed in the school infirmary. Sona turned to look at her queen, meeting her companion's mixed eyes with her own violet ones, a look that had only come across her face once made its way onto Sona. A smile that was both smug and exuded an amount of happiness that her childlike older sister would be hard-pressed to match it. The look on her master's face did not go unnoticed by Tsubaki. And Sona finally responded to her servant, the smug happy expression never leaving her face. Tsubaki, once school hours are over, be sure that everyone gathers in the student council room. We need to set a surefire strategy of how to get Issei Haidu to join us. When Tsubaki saw the worry on the first-year boy's face, she too thought that the protective instincts that seemed to resonate from the boy would be a great benefit for their group, but she did not grasp the full scale of what Issei's capabilities were. Yes Kaichu, I will inform all members to gather as soon as they're let out from their classes. Tsubaki said to Sona. She made to get up to inform the Sitri peerage about the meeting after school today, before being stopped by Sona herself. And Tsubaki, thank you for bringing me here, I appreciate it. Tsubaki held a smile and then shook her head at her master. Sona was passed out so of course she would assume that Tsubaki had brought her to the infirmary. Kaichu, I didn't bring you here. Issei Haidu had you in his arms from the moment you collapsed. He was very adamant that he bring you here himself, he was not willing to leave you in my care alone. Sona was pleasantly surprised that the boy she was scouting for her peerage had already proven that he could be relied on in at least one situation. Now she just needed to find out how to bring him to her side. Kuoh Class 1C. Issei's current class had been placed as a free period due to the teacher having an emergency, so he was conversing with his two neighbors, Momo and Reya, who had seen Issei carrying their master towards the infirmary with clear worry showing on his face. That was very sweet of you, Ice. Reya said with a sweet smile. She was very pleased with how he had acted towards her king, without even knowing her for more than a few minutes, and she desperately hoped that they would be able to have him in their ranks soon. Say Ice, Momo said from her spot sitting on the corner of Issei's desk. She gave Issei a sly smile as she spoke. If I pass out like that in your arms, would you carry me too? Issei felt his face heat up at his classmate's words, and his mouth was once again working faster than his brain. By the time he came to realize what he said, he just hoped that none of the girls in the vicinity, or katase and murayama, would punish him for the lack of foresight with his words. Of course, if either of you fainted, I wouldn't leave your side until you got the care you needed. So once Issei caught on to what he had said, he was preparing for the verbal reprimanding with closed eyes. But it never came. Instead Issei was almost knocked out of his seat by the girl with snow-white hair that had positioned herself almost on top of his desk. Issei was tightly hugged around his neck, the girl seemed to have supernatural strength as Issei was losing vital oxygen to his brain from the grip she had on him. "Ice, you're such a sweetheart," Momo practically yelled out to the whole class. Reya was just watching the moment with her usual sweet smile until she saw Issei start to turn blue from hypoxia, lack of oxygen. "Momo, I don't think he can breathe," she said to Momo, who was reluctant to let go, but once she finally did, Issei gasped for air while holding a smile. He had clearly enjoyed the feeling of having her pressed tightly against him. Which wasn't missed by the two girls as they smirked. "Fufu, he's trying so hard not to look or comment on our bodies. He's adorable," Reya thought as she watched Issei try to seem like he wasn't thoroughly enjoying Momo's breasts pressed against him. The door to the 1C classroom slid open to reveal Tsubaki standing there with her usual stoic expression. She glanced around the room before addressing the people she was sent to speak with. Once her eyes met with Momo and Reya, she also caught the sight of Momo embracing Issei and rose an eyebrow with a slight smile on her face. It seems they are taking a liking to him, she thought before speaking to the pair of bishops. "Momo Hanakai, Ryakusaka, please report to the student council room immediately after school hours." Before either of the girls could respond, Tsubaki departed back to wherever she came from. The free period was the last class of the day, and Issei felt he had gotten to know Reya and Momo pretty well. He would even consider them friends at this point. So when the last bell for the day rang, Issei gave his farewells to both of them and made his way to where Murayama and katase had agreed to meet for his continued physical and perversion training. The next morning, Issei woke up quicker than he usually would on a school day during his middle school days. "I guess being surrounded by girls on par with top-tier supermodels will do that to any guy," Issei thought before getting up to go for his morning run before he had to go to school. On his run to the school and back, Issei noticed red glow coming from the old school building. Issei just figured it was a strange light bulb or experiment going haywire, so he didn't pay attention to it. And so he continued his run and made his way back home to get ready for school. Kuoh Academy Orkroom. The red light that Issei noticed on his daily run wasn't from a light bulb, nor an experiment gone wrong. It was emitting from the irate body of the president of the Occult Research Club, Rias Gremory. She had received a message from her longtime friend and rival Sona Sitri. Sona had requested to meet with both of their peerages in the morning before school in her clubroom for an important relay of information. Just recalling the talk between the two of them made her blood boil in both jealousy and anger. Jealousy from the fact that Sona had claimed that she had found the Red Dragon Emperor and that he was to be a part of the Sitri peerage. And anger from the knowledge that if she had just refused or delayed the meeting between herself, her family, and her revolting fiancé, then she could have had a chance to lay claim to the boy herself. Flashback to the Orkan Student Council meeting. "Good morning, Sona. What was so urgent that it couldn't wait until after school?" Rias asked her rival, who sat across from her on the sofa on the other side of the coffee table in the center of the Ork room. It was rare for Sona to meet with Rias on the school campus at all, given how busy she typically was with being a part of the student council. "I wanted to inform you of a new prospect for my peerage. His name is Issei, a first year in class 1C. Sona's face stayed expressionless as usual. But she still hadn't exactly answered the question Rias asked. Why the sudden meeting? For any normal prospect, a message delivered by any means would have sufficed, but Sona was adamant about meeting in person this morning. "Alright, but that still doesn't tell me why you wanted to meet in person this morning. As I understand it, the student council has you rather busy, so a meeting in the flesh is something that would mean this Issei boy must be something special." Rias then saw something she hadn't seen in years from her stoic rival, a grin. Not a smile or a smirk of confidence. A full grin that carried an almost childish message of "I have something you can't have. Indeed, he is special, and more ways than one from what I've seen," Sona stated smugly with a grin that was starting to annoy Rias. Sona pushed her glasses back into place and continued. "I came into contact with Issei yesterday after my bishops informed me that they were absolutely certain that he possessed a sacred gear. So I went to meet the boy during the lunch break. I found him with two members of the group that has been educating our more perverse male students. He seemed like any normal and kind boy, that is. Until I shook his hand." "Okay, so what kind of sacred gear do you suspect the boy to have?" "I'm still not seeing the point of the meeting, Sona." Rias was getting more and more annoyed with the tone that Sona was using to describe her interaction with Issei, but had yet to say what exactly was special about him. "Issei is the host of the Red Dragon Emperor." Sona spoke matter-of-factly. Rias almost lost all composure at that exact moment. Her eyes were as wide as her sockets would allow and her jaw dropped. But when the words of the Sitri era sank in. "Sona has claim to the Red Dragon Emperor, and meanwhile, I was away wasting my time trying to fight my engagement. Well, the solution was here all along," Rias thought. The crimson glow started to roll off of the president of the Occult Research Club. It held an ancient power that now only resided with one bloodline, and that was the bloodline Rias came from. The power radiating off of her started to affect her surroundings, papers disintegrating, her desk forming cracks in the solid wood, and the air grew thick. The members of the student council all stood in a combat stance. They didn't really expect Rias to attack them, but the power coming off of her was unpredictable, and they made sure to be ready for all situations. All the members of the orc all stood away from their king, equally surprised by the burst of power from Rias. But they understood where this anger was coming from, especially after the meeting with Riser Phoenix. Rias, that's not the only reason I'm here. I'd like to present a deal to you. The Sitri heiress stated while pressing her glasses up to her face once again, but this time they gained a slightly devious glint to them. Rias quickly calmed herself down to prepare for whatever her friend had to offer. She had known Sona for most of her life and would trust that she had Ria's best interests at heart and vice versa. Sona knew how much she despised Riser and had tried to find a way out of the engagement. But the only way either of them had found in the contract that would lead to Ria's freedom would be a rating game. So alright, what sort of deal? I will personally train Issei, and when the time comes, I will lend him to you for a rating game against Riser, should it come down to that. And in exchange I ask for a favor. Rias narrowed her eyes at Sona. A favor that would grant her the support of the Red Dragon Emperor would no doubt be costly, but she was willing to pay almost any price, and there were very few things she wouldn't do to be rid of Riser. He was a scourge to the underworld, and what would that favor entail exactly? This was the big reveal for Sona. She knew that at first her idea would sound insane, but given the chance to explain the details, Rias would see the value and hopefully agree. Sona readied herself by taking a silent breath in, letting it out, and opening her mouth to speak to her longtime friend. In return for the support of the Red Dragon Emperor, you will marry him. Sona knew that she needed to pause here to let the information she was relaying to sink in. And it didn't take long, maybe a full 3 seconds before Ria's crimson hair flowed in the non-existent wind that was produced from the power of her frustration. Sona, however, expected this and waited for the right moment to deliver the rest of her plan. What? How does that change my situation at all? I know for a fact you're smarter than this, Sona. Why would you of all people be willing to free me from one marriage, only to place me in another? Rias was livid, and rightfully so. Her longest friend had just offered to free her from one marriage, only to place her into another, with some unknown person. A hand was placed on her shoulder to calm her down. It was from her queen and another long-time friend Akeno Himejima. Rias was quick to calm herself down so that she didn't damage any more of her clubroom. Akeno then addressed the Sitri king, voicing her own opinion on the matter, as well as her questions as to how the situation would benefit Akeno's king. Aichu, may I ask a question about your plan? Akeno asked with a serious yet inquisitive tone. And Sona nodded, already expecting a few questions about the part of her plan that was revealed. I understand that the support of the Red Dragon Emperor will increase our odds greatly. But what benefit is there from a marriage between the Red Dragon and the Gremory family? Exactly as I thought, they're only seeing the short term. Sona thought to herself. She had expected this and would be quick to explain so that all questions could be satisfied and they could go about their everyday lives without further delay. A marriage between Rias and Issei, the host of the Red Dragon Emperor, would help to solidify the dragon's ties to the devils. This would benefit not only the Gremory family but devils as a whole, should another war break out. But that's not all I have planned, Rias. The explanation Sona had delivered thus far had all in the room captivated, waiting to see what the tactician in the room had come up with. Rias knew better than anyone else that Sona never did anything without thinking of any and all possible outcomes. It was why she trusted Sona with her and her peerage's lives if it were to come down to it. Rias couldn't think of anyone else that thought as far ahead as Sona, so the least she could do was hear her out. Okay, Sona, what other parts are there to your plan? Sona smirked. This particular part of her plan was the part she was most proud of. It would not only double the ties of the Red Dragon Emperor to the devils, but also the families of the Sitri and Gremory houses, and therefore bringing each house into further prominence. Rias will be married to the Red Dragon Emperor. And should Issei be able to beat me in a game of chess either now or in the future, as my agreement with my family states, I will marry him as well. This will not only further hold the ties of Mr. Haidu, but it will also be a great benefit for each of our families. All in the room were silent. Sona Sitri, a young woman who had defiantly and successfully avoided any and all marriage contracts thus far, was willingly putting herself into this deal with Rias. Rias and Akeno seemed to be the only ones to grasp the situation fully and shared a glance before Rias asked one final question to the Sitri heiress. If you're placing yourself in this deal, this boy must be special indeed. I'll agree, only if I have your word that he is nothing like Riser. And I want a clause on paper stating that should either party deem the other not to the other's liking, said party holds the right to cancel the engagement at any time before the wedding is to take place. Sona was once again prepared for the words of her rival. When she met the host of the Red Dragon, she saw more than just his sacred gear. Her family's mastery over water magic allowed each member of the Sitri family to gauge a person's worth, their values, with just a touch. And she had seen the perverse nature that Issei was trying his hardest to suppress in order to lead a better life, but not only that, the genuine worry he showed when she collapsed in his arms had only confirmed what the magical signs were telling her. Of course Rias. I had the chance to meet Issei yesterday and to gauge what kind of person he was. All of the files I have on his past had prepared me to be faced with an unrepentant pervert who would openly gawk and remark on Tsubaki's physical appearance. At the mention that the one who was possibly going to be married to Rias had a perverted nature, one of Ria's servants perked up. She was a short girl with white hair just past her shoulder, with hazel eyes and cat clips in her hair. She was Kaneko Toju, Ria's rook. How perverted. Apparently him and two of his friends had openly proclaimed that they would each start a harem. With further explanation of how the boy acted in the past, Sona saw the uncomfortable body language from the short girl and made to place it to rest as she spoke her next words. The boy I met yesterday was nothing like his files had portrayed him as. Once I shook his hand and I was met with the aura of the red dragon. I found my body unable to hold itself upright and had braced myself to fall to the ground. But Issei had caught me in his arms before I fell. And when I looked up to his face, I didn't see a boy who was trying to take advantage of a helpless girl. No, I saw a young man who would put the safety of those he cared about before his own well-being. He even went so far as to personally carry me to the infirmary when I had eventually passed out, even with Tsubaki saying that she could take care of me, he was unwilling to let anyone else see to my care. Rias had been taking in all of the information about her potential future husband from Sona, and to honest, it sounded like the type of man that she would hear about in stories when she was little. A man that would do everything in his power to ensure the safety of his loved ones. Rias would have to verify for herself that Issei was that type of man, but if he was, then she would happily marry him and give him all of herself in return. And from your words, he seems to be a special young man indeed. I would like to meet this Issei for myself though. Sona adjusted her glasses and glanced at the clock on the door. It was time for this meeting to conclude, she had a stack of paperwork to attend to before the start of the school day. Of course Rias. That is all I had planned for this meeting, so myself and my peerage must be going now. Sona stated as she turned around and proceeded out of the old school building with the rest of the student council following quickly. Rias had a thoughtful expression on her face, going over all of this new information. The idea of another marriage arranged from the destruction of her current one wasn't a good thought by itself, but as Sona had further explained the potential groom, Rias found herself curious and willing to give it a chance. The idea of the Sitri and Gremory houses being joined for mutual benefit alone was enticing. But do you really think this is a good idea? A male voice came from the corner of the room by the window with the morning light shining through. This young man had medium-length straight blonde hair, gray eyes and a mole under his left eye. He was already being promoted as the only potential member of the male student body at Kuoh Academy that wasn't trying to pursue some offlandish fantasy of starting a harem and claiming as many girls as he could get his hands on. Rias looked over to her young knight with a kind and soft smile as she spoke to him. I appreciate the concern Yudo, Sona and I have been friends for a long time. I would place my life in her hands. The fact that she added herself to this deal only speaks to this young man's potential as well as values. Rias placed her hands on her hips and addressed all of the group but once more before they would need to separate for the school day. Let's go meet this Issei, shall we? End of the part 1. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.